Under the soft golden light of the Sahel, a low hum begins to rise, the sound of machines coming back to life after years of silence. Once this factory stood abandoned, covered in dust and memories. Today, its walls echo again, not with despair, but with hope. Men and women who once walked away in tears have returned in their work clothes, standing proudly beside the same cotton machines that once fed their families. And among them walks a man who has become a symbol of defiance in modern Africa, President Ibrahim Traoré. He did not come to cut a ribbon or deliver a rehearsed speech. He came because, as he said, we cannot call ourselves free if we still import what we can produce. This place, SOFACOV, a small medical cotton factory in Burkina Faso, was closed for years due to conflict and neglect. But Traoré saw more than a forgotten building. He saw workers without tools, a nation exporting its own cotton only to buy it back at 10 times the price. He saw the hidden wound of dependency, and he decided to heal it. When the machines began turning again, it wasn't just cotton being spun, it was the very fabric of national pride, sovereignty, and self-belief. Every roll of cotton now carries a message. We will no longer beg to exist, we will produce to live. And so a question lingers for all of us watching from across the ocean. Can a single factory truly change the destiny of a nation? Or is this just the beginning of a revolution that will redefine what it means to be African in the 21st century? If you've ever believed that dignity begins with work, that sovereignty is not declared but built, then stay with us. Because what happened inside this humble Burkinabé factory may just be the spark that lights Africa's next great awakening. Please share this video if you believe that producing what we consume is the first step toward true freedom. And subscribe if you believe that truth is more powerful than the headlines. When President Ibrahim Traoré first heard about the small medical cotton factory called SOFACOV, it wasn't through a government report. It came from a whisper, a letter from local workers who had lost everything. They wrote about a place once alive with the sound of spinning machines now swallowed by silence. They wrote about skilled women and men, technicians, mothers, fathers left without work watching imported medical cotton from Europe replace the very products they used to make with their own hands. That letter reached the presidency, and instead of filing it away, Traoré sent a team. He wanted to understand what really happened. When his aides returned, they told him of a woman, the former director of SOFACOV, who had tried against all odds to keep the machines running until they broke beyond repair. Her workers stayed as long as they could, cleaning rusted parts with hope that someone someday would care enough to restart it all. Traoré's response was simple: if the problem is not the people, then the problem is ours to fix. Weeks later, trucks rolled into the dusty compound. Technicians from the National Development Fund unloaded boxes of new equipment, spare motors, and replacement belts. Local electricians worked day and night to reconnect the old generators. The air filled again with the smell of oil and cotton. And when the machines roared back to life one by one, the workers cried. Some held hands, others fell to their knees in silence. After years of unemployment, they were not just getting their jobs back, they were reclaiming their dignity. The reopening of SOFACOV was more than an industrial event. It was a political statement. Traoré was there in person, not surrounded by foreign investors, but by farmers and factory workers. His convoy carried no Western flags, no IMF advisors, just the Burkinabé tricolor fluttering in the dry wind. Standing on the small factory platform, Traoré addressed them directly. Each of you here represents something greater than a paycheck. You represent the proof that Burkina Faso can produce what it consumes. You represent our independence. He reminded them that the cotton used in every hospital bandage, every wound dressing, every compress comes from Burkinabé soil. It's the same cotton subsidized by local farmers, exported raw for pennies and re-imported as expensive medical goods. We pay for it twice, he said, once in sweat and again in humiliation. In that moment, his message became a doctrine: produce, transform, consume. Those three words echoed through the factory halls, written later in paint above the main entrance: produire, transformer, consommer. For the workers, this was more than policy. It was the rebirth of a dream. The government committed funds to restore operations fully: new looms, updated sterilization units, expanded storage rooms. Within months, the plant was running at full capacity, supplying hospitals across the country. Each bundle of hydrophilic cotton now carries the label Fabriqué au Burkina Faso, made in Burkina Faso. For the first time in decades, a hospital in Ouagadougou or Bobo-Dioulasso can treat patients with locally made medical supplies. In one quiet corner of the plant, the female director, now reinstated, addressed the president. "We may not all be on the battlefield, but here we fight for our country with our work." Her words summed up what Traore has always believed, that sovereignty isn't achieved through speeches or wars, but through work production and resilience. The reopening of SOFACOV became the seed of a larger movement. Across the country, other entrepreneurs began approaching the government with similar plans: textile processing, local pharmaceuticals, even agricultural machinery. And as the news spread, people began calling this small event by a grander name, La Renaissance du Coton, the cotton rebirth. What began as the revival of a small forgotten factory had quietly become a national turning point, a living example of what an independent Africa could look like when it starts to believe in its own hands again. The moment came quietly, without ceremony, just the president standing before the workers, his voice firm but calm. He looked around the room at the rows of machines spinning white threads of cotton and asked a question that pierced deeper than any speech. Who among us has never fallen sick? Who has never needed a bandage or cotton at a hospital? The room went silent. Dozens of faces turned toward him, unsure where he was going. Then his tone changed, soft at first, then cutting. And yet he said, "The cotton used to heal our wounds is ours, grown by our farmers, subsidized by our own taxes, but transformed elsewhere and sold back to us at a price we can barely afford." He paused. You could hear the hum of the machines behind him. Then came the words that would later be printed on the front page of every Burkinabé newspaper: "This is not just cotton. This is our pride, our labor, our sovereignty." When we speak of independence, this is what it means to produce, to transform, and to consume our own. The hall erupted in applause. Some cried. Others raised their fists. For many, it was the first time a leader had spoken their truth, not in the language of economics, but in the language of dignity. At that moment, the speech transcended the walls of SOFACOV. Clips of it began circulating online within hours. The video, a simple recording of Traore in his khaki uniform, spread like wildfire across Africa. On TikTok, young Africans began repeating the phrase, "Produire, transformer, consommer." On Twitter, Burkinabé doctors posted photos using locally made cotton pads with captions, "We are healing with our own hands now." Even in neighboring Mali and Niger, people called it the cotton doctrine, but not everyone applauded. In Paris and Brussels, some trade analysts warned that Burkina Faso's new industrial direction could destabilize market relations with European suppliers. One European journalist wrote, "What Traoré calls sovereignty might actually mean isolation." Yet on the streets of Ouagadougou, that word sovereignty had never sounded more alive. Posters of Traoré's speech began appearing on shop walls, classrooms, and factories. University students quoted his line in debates about African economics. A musician even turned his speech into a song that played on national radio, Le coton du peuple pour le peuple. For the factory workers, the reaction was deeply personal. Mariama, a young technician, said to a reporter, "I used to think I was just sewing cotton. Now I know I'm sewing freedom." Meanwhile, the woman who directed SOFACOV could not hold back her tears when she spoke after the president. "We cannot all be on the front lines with weapons, but in our work we fight for our country. We heal our people with what our land gives us." Her words drew a long applause, the kind that doesn't end quickly, not out of politeness, but pride. From that day, SOFACOV was no longer just a medical cotton factory. It became a symbol of rebirth, of what Africa can achieve when it believes in itself. Foreign diplomats in Ouagadougou began paying closer attention. An American observer reportedly said, "This man Traore, he's not just building factories, he's building a mindset. That's far more powerful." And he was right, because what happened at SOFACOV wasn't just about cotton or production. It was about rewriting a story centuries old, a story where Africa was always the supplier, never the maker. That day, Traoré didn't just revive a factory. He resurrected an identity. As he walked out of the compound, the workers lined up along the path, their hands raised in salute. The president didn't wave or smile. He simply said, "Be patient, be proud, and keep producing. The world is watching." Outside, the Burkinabé flag fluttered in the dry Sahel wind, and for the first time in a long time, the people didn't just see it as a flag, they saw it as a mirror. In the weeks that followed, something began to shift in Burkina Faso, quietly, steadily, almost like the slow turning of the earth before a sunrise. The rebirth of SOFACOV had set off a chain reaction. Across the country, people who had once given up on the idea of national industry began to dream again. In Bobo Dioulasso, a group of young engineers launched a pilot project to recycle hospital waste into reusable medical materials. In Koudougou, women's cooperatives began producing locally made gauze and sterilized cotton packs for rural clinics. The message was clear: if one small factory could rise again, why not all of us? The Ministry of Industry soon announced a new initiative called Burkina Produit Burkina Produces. It offered small loans and tax exemptions for any entrepreneur willing to transform local raw materials instead of exporting them. Within 3 months, over 40 applications flooded in, from soap makers to medical glove producers, from textile weavers to dairy cooperatives. Everywhere, the name SOFACOV became shorthand for something greater: the proof that sovereignty could be built, not borrowed. But the impact wasn't just economic. It was emotional, even spiritual. For many Burkinabé citizens, seeing President Traoré inside that modest cotton plant had felt deeply symbolic. Here was a head of state standing among machines and workers, not in marble halls. Here was leadership without distance. In Ouagadougou's marketplaces, people spoke of Traoré's visit the way older generations once spoke of Thomas Sankara, with a mixture of nostalgia and new faith. Street vendors began wearing T-shirts that read "Produire, Transformer, Consommer." School teachers used the SOFACOV example in civics lessons to explain what sovereignty means in practice. The social atmosphere of the country began to change. There was less cynicism in the air, more purpose. Young people who once dreamed only of migrating to Europe started asking how they could build something at home. Even the opposition, usually quick to criticize, admitted that this time Traoré had touched something real. One opposition leader told a journalist, "We may disagree on politics, but when you see Burkinabé cotton turned into Burkinabé medicine, you cannot deny the power of that image." Yet behind the scenes, this quiet industrial revival was shaking more than hearts. It was shaking power. Importers, who had long profited from selling foreign medical supplies, began to lose contracts. Some foreign companies reportedly tried to lobby local officials to slow down domestic production. But the mood of the nation had changed. For the first time, the Burkinabé people were united around an idea bigger than politics: self-reliance. Government ministers began using SOFACOV as a case study in economic reform meetings. If we can do it for cotton, they argued, we can do it for gold, for food, for fuel. The phrase industrial patriotism became part of official speeches, and among ordinary citizens, there was a new sense of ownership, and not just over the factory, but over the future itself. When the first shipment of Burkinabé-made cotton rolls was exported to a hospital in Ghana, national TV broadcasted the moment live. The anchor's voice trembled slightly as he announced, "For the first time in history, Burkina Faso exports not raw cotton, but a finished medical product." In that instant, the entire nation seemed to breathe differently, prouder, taller, freer. What had started as a small act of restoration had grown into a movement of belief. A belief that the path to sovereignty is not written in treaties or slogans, but in factories, classrooms, and calloused hands. And somewhere in the heart of Ouagadougou, under the hum of the same factory lights, a new generation of Burkinabé workers began to understand what their president meant when he said, "Sovereignty is not given. It is built one machine, one worker, one act of courage at a time." From Washington to Paris, few expected that the revival of a small factory in Burkina Faso would echo across the world. Yet it did not because of its size, but because of what it represented. For the first time in decades, an African leader wasn't asking for aid or loans. He was asking for respect and for the right to produce. In Washington, policy analysts at think tanks began quietly discussing what they called the Traore doctrine. One report by the Atlantic Policy Forum noted, Burkina Faso's new economic direction may seem small, but ideologically it represents a major shift, a rejection of dependency as the cornerstone of African development. In the American press, the reaction was mixed. Some liberal columnists admired Traoré's hands-on leadership, comparing his style to that of post-war American industrial reformers Roosevelt in Fatigue's one headline read. Others saw a challenge to the Western-led trade system. A conservative commentator warned, if African countries begin producing and processing their own raw materials, global markets will have to adjust, and not in our favor. But among ordinary Americans, especially the older generation who lived through the industrial decline of their own towns, Traoré's message struck a different chord. They recognized something familiar in the story of SOFACOV, the pain of watching factories close, the dignity lost when production leaves home. For many, Burkina Faso's resurgence felt like a mirror held up to their own history. One retired factory worker from Detroit commented online, "I never thought I'd see an African country doing what we once did, fighting to make things with their own hands. That's real patriotism." Across Europe, reactions were equally divided. French media initially treated the event as symbolic, a small step in a poor nation's dream of self-sufficiency. But as weeks passed and Burkina Faso announced new partnerships with neighboring Mali and Niger to create a regional supply chain for medical goods, the tone began to shift. By late summer, Le Monde Afrique called it bluntly, "The SOFACOV model marks the end of an era Africa is learning to heal itself." Meanwhile, in Moscow and Beijing, commentators praised Traoré as the embodiment of a new multipolar Africa, one less reliant on Western influence. Russian state outlets referred to him as Le Capitaine de la Dignité. In China, social media users began sharing clips of SOFACOV's reopening as an example of South-South cooperation, emphasizing shared experiences of industrial rebirth after colonial exploitation. But perhaps the most profound response came not from governments, but from the African diaspora. In New York, Atlanta, Toronto, and Paris, community groups held screenings of the SOFACOV ceremony. In the footage, the humble cotton machines turning again were met with standing ovations. Many viewers wept. For them, this wasn't just Burkina Faso's story, it was Africa's. A Ghanaian-American teacher in Baltimore put it best: "For so long, Africa was the story of extraction. Traoré is writing a new chapter, the story of transformation." And so what began as a modest act of local governance became an international message, one that questioned the foundations of global economics. Burkina Faso had shown the world that sovereignty could start not with power, but with purpose. It didn't require vast armies or billion-dollar deals, only the courage to turn back on a machine that had once stopped and say, "We will make again. We will stand again." In that defiant whisper, the world heard something both ancient and new, the sound of a continent remembering its strength. As dusk falls over Ouagadougou, the hum of the SOFACOV factory softens into the night, steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The workers lock the gates and walk home under a sky painted with the same red, green, and gold that waves above their factory. For them, it is no longer just a flag, it is proof. Proof that a nation once dismissed as poor can stand again through work, unity, and faith. But beyond the quiet pride lies a deeper warning, one that echoes far beyond Burkina Faso. Because the forces that once silenced factories like SOFACOV have not disappeared. They only changed names. Today, they wear the logos of development banks, foreign partners, and aid institutions. They come not with chains, but with contracts that still decide what Africa produces, who it sells to, and at what price. President Ibrahim Traoré understands this better than most. His vision of sovereignty isn't built on isolation, but on self-respect, on the simple belief that no nation should be rich in resources, yet poor in dignity. He once said, "We are not asking for permission to exist. We are simply reclaiming what was always ours, the right to work, to create, to feed, and to heal our own people." And in those words lies both hope and danger. Hope for a continent waking up to its potential. Danger for a global system that profits from its sleep. As Burkina Faso exports its first rolls of locally made medical cotton, the question grows louder. If one small African factory can challenge an entire global order built on dependence, what happens when 100 factories rise 1,000? For older viewers across the ocean, those who remember the hum of American steel mills, the pride of local hands building national strength, this moment may feel hauntingly familiar. The struggle for economic dignity is universal. The dream of self-reliance is timeless. The story of SOFACOV is not just about Burkina Faso. It is about what every society must ask itself when confronted with decline. Do we surrender our tools, or do we pick them up again? Under the Sahel moon, the answer seems clear. A small factory has become a beacon, a reminder that sovereignty begins where dependency ends, and that history is written not by the powerful, but by those who refuse to stay silent. So tonight, as the lights of SOFACOV burn through the Burkinabé night, ask yourself, can we still build something real, something lasting with our own hands, or will we let others keep writing our story for us? If you believe, like President Ibrahim Traoré, that sovereignty is work, not words, please share this story. Let the world see what true independence looks like. And subscribe if you believe that the truth, no matter how small it begins, is still stronger than any empire built on lies.